For handstand, the four main areas that we focus on in preparation are the forearms to support the wrists. We focus on shoulder opening so that we can better get the arm in line with the body. So I'm gonna have Rachel reach her arms up. Good, so what we want when the arms are overhead is to have the wrists in line with the shoulders, the hips, and the feet. All right, often, will you have your back face the camera? When we keep the arms in what's called upward scapular rotation and move the arms to the back body, the arms end up being closer toward the front of the body. And when we move the arms to the back body, they go into more of an internal rotation where the shoulder blades pinch together. So we do work to keep those shoulder blades wide enough as we lengthen, but then go ahead, turn profile. We also want to keep the next area, core. You can relax your arms. So we want to have forearm strengthening, core arm strengthening as prep work, and then also hip mobility. So stretching the hip flexors and the hamstrings so that when we're coming up into our handstand, if I had tighter hamstrings, it's a pretty heavy hop. By having more bendy hamstrings and a stretchier hip flexor, that transition into the handstand, whoop, is a lot lighter. All right, so once you've done that prep work, and you can of course check out the playlists that correlate with whatever it is you're working on, getting into the handstand, one more time, we're gonna handstand upright. So Rachel's gonna reach her arms up, all right, and what we have, the triceps hugging to the midline, and there's a feeling of the reach through the elbow from the sides of the waist to the fingertips. Now, because she's right side up, the stretch is coming from the waist to the fingertips, but we can also practice pushing the floor away from us with our hands when we're upside down to create that spaciousness in the shoulder. Would you mind turning profile? So what we want to avoid when gravity is working down on us is compressing the shoulders. So if she were upside down and the weight of her body was sinking down into her shoulders, we could potentially injure the front of the shoulder. So we want to have that length. All right, profile again. Okay, then we have, as she's reaching up, these muscles hugging back, and the tailbone is reaching toward the heels via the lift in the belly. And then we don't forget to breathe. All right, upside down can sound intimidating for some people if you have a mixed level class. So one way that you can make handstand more accessible for those who don't want to hop up in that group is to do it standing up. So Rachel's going to take her hands to the wall, and they'll be hip height. All right. In this position, if you have someone that's really tight, they're likely to look like this in the pose. So for that individual, the work is softening the chest down and then reaching the hips back. So this would be the ultimate position that we want to get them into. The hips, the shoulders, and the hands are stacked. All right. For very flexible folks, they're likely to sink. All right, so for these people, we have the opposite work. We're working on lifting the low belly so the tailbone tucks, pressing the front ribs in so that the torso gets more straight. Flexible people have a hard time balancing in handstand because their pelvis tends to drop over. You can relax. Okay, so when we're discussing core work for handstand, for most beginners, stabilizing the pelvis is most accessible via the lift of the low belly. There are many yogis who prefer to engage the glutes. There's nothing wrong with that. The glutes are a great hip stabilizer, but for most beginners, figuring out how to squeeze their butt when they're already upside down and their mind is freaking out is harder. So for most newer folks, I recommend using the low belly and engaging the hip flexors to keep the hips upright and the legs extending skyward, especially for those who are very flexible. But if your newer student automatically engages the glutes, that's fine. All right, so the next level would be, I'm gonna have Rachel measure herself one leg distance from the wall. Okay, so her hands are gonna come where her hips were. Okay, and then she'll go ahead and step one foot up the wall and then the other. And what she did, which was good, is she had her feet hip height. Oftentimes you'll have students crawl their feet all the way up the wall. If they're brand new, leave them alone. They're just happy to be up there. All right, but if you have a student that you think is capable of having some clarity of thought in this position, And then you can have them lower their feet to hip height, and then we'll lift one leg up. All right, what we want to avoid is trying to get this foot off the wall by reaching this leg away, because we've lost the engagement of the hip flexor. We want to practice the alignment for our eventual straighter handstand. So it's the outer hip rolling forward, and this, guys, the thigh bone is pulling into the socket via the lift of the belly. The front ribs are engaged. To assist this student, I'm going to put my hands on the front of her thigh, and I'm instructing her to kick this leg toward the wall. So push toward the wall, and then the other leg will kind of just float right up with it. All right, and then we'll come back down. The gazing point is something that's different for each yogi. For most beginners, looking forward of the fingertips, it helps with the stability. Eventually, the drop gaze is where we're going, but that's a very difficult variation of handstand. So I encourage my students to find a gazing point, usually start forward of their fingers, and then maybe if that is too much on their neck, take the gaze to between the index fingers, and then eventually between the wrists, maybe drop gaze. Turn around. For our kicks to handstand, I'm going to have Rachel place her hands down a little bit further than a hand distance from the wall, and the hands are shoulder width apart. She'll lift one leg up. Okay, I'm going to show the naughty way first. Often, yes, this is what happens, and when these students kick to handstand, sometimes the low belly stays close to the floor, and it's just the toes. Go ahead, give it a kick. That goes overhead. So what that can do is it throws out the low back, because these muscles aren't moving to the back body and help escort the whole torso overhead. So rather than having the toes lead the way, we're going to think of this part of the back or the low belly leading the way. So once again, she'll lift her leg up, she'll feel the belly engaged, and then we'll go ahead and give it a kick up. Really nice. Okay, when a student has both feet at the wall, rather than having their hips thrust away from the wall, which you can see creates more compression in the low back to get off the wall, we're going to sit the butt back. She'll bend one knee and then lift the other leg up. Yeah, whichever leg is comfortable. Front ribs in, and then, yeah, little contraction in the hip flexor, and then we're just going to try to make the standing foot lighter. All right, the knees are together. The hips are stacked, and what that does, you can come back to the wall again. Rather than, once again, thrusting the hips away from the wall, we're moving the front ribs, the buttocks toward the wall, lifting one leg up, so her whole body is in a handstand except for this bottom part of her leg. And then we just try to feel what it means to not need that foot to lift it up. Really nice. Yeah. All right, and then if you're dealing with a student who's fearful of getting off the wall, you can just slowly move them back. Falling out of handstand, you ready for this? Yeah, just relax, I'll keep talking for a moment. So falling out of handstand is really tricky because as much technique as you can teach your students, there's a lack of ability to apply those techniques in the 1 second it takes to fall. So what I recommend is simply practicing leaning to one side, looking toward the hand that you're falling. The body tends to go in the direction of the gaze, and just drawing the knees toward the chest. So rather than falling into the wheel, which for some yogis is okay, but for most can hurt the low back, drawing the knees to the chest makes us kind of cartwheel to one side without popping over. So Rachel will go ahead.
Which direction?
Whichever one is natural for you. So she'll put her hands down, she'll lift a leg up, she'll give it a kick, and then she's going to lean to one side and then kind of just, yep, fall over. There you go. That's it. Now you give it a try. Oh, should we do one more? Here, wait, one more. All right, so okay. I'm going to have Rachel come on down to her handstand. If your student is about ready to balance and they're working in the middle of the room, go ahead, kick up. Here's one more way that you can support them. So I'll have her, the split legs is one thing they can do for themselves. So we can kind of use one leg forward and one leg back to help find balance. It lowers the center of gravity and makes it easier than upright. And then we're going to bring the legs together. As an assistant, you can have one hand right in front and one hand right in back. And you'll have your student try to figure out what it would take to move off of your hands. So, and then you can relax. So one hand forward, one hand back. This is for students who intellectually understand all the techniques, but they can't quite apply it when they're upside down. This is their opportunity to have a little support on either side and work it out from themselves. The main areas that they'll probably be negotiating between is the front ribs and the low belly. So if the body's leaning too far, come back upside down. When the body tends to fall this way, that's usually, so toward the center of the room, that's usually the front ribs, all right? When the body tends to fall this way, we wanna pull the hip flexors. So the front ribs bring the body in this direction, the hip flexors bring the body in that direction. And now, that's a wrap. You give it a try.